So thank you for joining us today. Platform migrations, Windows and SQL Server best practices. Today I'm joined by Carl C. and Richard Stout. Carl is a senior technology consultant in our Tampa office. Richard is a partner with RPI and prolific technologist. They will be doing the presentation today. Again, if you have questions, just type them into the chat box. And then we'll follow up at the end with some administrative announcements of our own. Thank you very much. Take it away, gentlemen.
All right. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
All right. Today we're going to be talking about platform migration, specifically for Lawson customers that are considering moving from Unix, from iSeries, from Oracle, from DB2, over to the Microsoft technology stack, be that on-premise or as part of an Infor Cloud project.
Right.
You've pulled a chip. There we go. So here's what we're going to cover. What are some of the trends that we're seeing with the Lawson space moving to Windows and SQL Server? What to expect as far as running Lawson on that platform, and how to get prepared for your move. So we are RPI consultants. 70-some consultants with expertise across the spectrum of Infor Lawson, functional expertise and technical expertise, offices in Baltimore and Tampa and Kansas City. Most of our Lawson technical practice is based here in our Tampa office. And this week, rather than doing any work, we've decided to just produce a whole bunch of webinars. So please follow our journey throughout this week. And check in on many more webinars to come, culminating in the Florida Lawson user group right here in our backyard on Friday.
And we love taking pictures.
And we love taking pictures. So over the past couple of years, we've had the privilege to assist a lot of customers moving from Lawson 9 to Lawson 10. In fact, over 50 projects of upgrades or net news, cloud implementations, and of those, if we look at customers that we've helped get to Lawson 10X in one way or another, 68% of our customer base there is on the Windows platform. So it's certainly been the most popular platform recently. And obviously that's a big change, right? Because Lawson has historically been a Unix, preferential Unix application. And Windows was really in the minority. Of all those projects that we've done recently, where 68% were building on the Microsoft technology stack, a full third of those were actually conversions, moving from DB2 or Oracle over to SQL Server. So we've definitely seen that this is has been a trend in the Lawson space to move to a full Microsoft technology stack. So why is that? Why are customers interested in moving to Windows? Well, there are a couple of factors. And what we hear from our customers is maybe they're on aging proprietary hardware. They're not looking to invest in more P-Series hardware. Perhaps they already have a virtualization platform in-house with VMware or Hyper-V or one of the other vendors, and they're looking to take advantage of that. A lot of organizations have invested in virtualization systems which have provided a highly available server application platform. Maybe they've got multiple data centers and VM replication, and they want to take advantage of those features by bringing Lawson over to that world. And those VM systems run on Intel chipsets. So you'll have to move off of AIX and onto something like Windows or Linux to take advantage of the major virtualization systems. Other reasons that we've heard our customers say is that Lawson might be the last application left in-house that's running on Unix or running on Oracle, and they really aren't looking to maintain so many specific skill sets around that platform for just one application, right? If most of the enterprise applications are on Windows and SQL Server, that's where you have the greatest amount of expertise, and that's where you want to standardize to take advantage of the resources and skills that you have in-house. Now, we're not Infor, but I could say, we are engaged in the space and have some pretty tight connections with Infor, as well as a lot of customers, and we sense where the wind is blowing. Infor traditionally was a Unix-first company, and lately it seems that Windows has been the #1 operating system as far as new development, and obviously they have chosen Windows as the platform for the Infor Cloud Lawson applications today. So we see that Infor is definitely moving moving forward in the direction of embracing the Microsoft technology stack.
Mm-hmm.
So, what to expect?
A big ball of rubber bands.
Big ball of rubber bands. Complexity. Obviously, when you're doing a big technology project, maybe it's an upgrade, maybe it's moving to the cloud. If that project includes moving from one database type to another, moving from one operating system to another, that adds a lot of complexity into the project. So we're talking about increasing the overall project timeline to account for all the various tasks that are specific to platform migration. We're talking about an extra amount of project management and communication that needs to happen, because you're moving from one type of system with a certain type of resources and people that are used to supporting that system to another type of system that might engage new or different resources. And you've got things like customizations or interfaces that might need to get refactored, redeveloped, and really need to come to agreement amongst all parties. What's the right strategy to do that? And obviously you want to keep your end users tightly involved in these types of projects, because they need to validate that what you're doing works. And when it comes to things like customizations, we have to remember, why are we doing these things in the first place? It's to serve the needs of the business. So if we're converting a customization from one technology to another, we want to make sure that it still meets the business need it was originally created for.
So when we start looking at a platform migration, what all does that include? What all kind of items are we looking at? So I think with the operating system, we're mostly looking at server-side scripts and interfaces. We're going to dive in a bit more, but obviously the operating systems are different, so there's going to be some differences there. And with interfaces, anything touching that system is going to have to be touched, taken a look at. With database objects, converting from Oracle or DB2 to SQL Server, a lot of those objects are going to change. If you have custom tables or views, store procedures, all those are going to have to come over. And even looking at reports, when the database changes, the reports are going to have to change. Unless we're talking about the OLEDB, anything that directly accesses the database, we're going to have to look at to test and change as well.
Yeah.
So specifically on the OS conversion, we're looking at the batch identity. That's the LSF operating system identity. There's a pretty big difference between Windows and Unix there. On Unix, you have the Unix OS ID that's stored for that. On Windows, we're going to use the Active Directory domain ID. So with Lawson, they store it as the NT ID on there. So that's a pretty big change as far as the way it stores that identity in the database. It does a
So we're
text
talking
conversion.
about things like the operator field?
Right, yes. Yeah. So the audit tables, right, for reporting capabilities. So that actually changes the ID that is displayed when you do a platform migration like this as well. So one of the other big changes as well is file transfers. So out of the box, Unix comes with FTP and is very easy to set up SFTP. With Windows, you can set up FTP and FTPS, but the FTPS is not the same protocol.
Right. So, Microsoft ships Windows with an integrated FTP or FTPS server, and that's part of IIS. You need to add that role onto the server to enable it, and of course open the firewall. FTPS is basically FTP secured with an SSL certificate. So it really has more in common with HTTPS than with what you might be used to when it comes to key exchange, file transfer on a Unix system. Of course, there are SFTP servers available from third parties that could be installed on a Windows server if you so desire.
There is another option there, though, for interfaces, moving files around. It's very easy to set up map drives using the file system. So that's obviously secured with the ID that's logged into the system. If you're kind of scared about the FTPS versus SFTP thing.
Yeah, map drives are maybe easier to understand and certainly work within your overall Windows domain pretty smoothly.
So one thing to pay attention also is the directory structure. So on Windows, the backslashes will get you. Specifically when you're looking at programming, development, customization changes. That's just another thing to watch out for.
Right, even as simple as like a properties file, a single backslash is an escape character. So if you're specifying a file path in, say, an MSCM filter properties, you got to use double backslashes.
All right. Database conversion, my favorite topic. So there's a lot of things going on with the database conversion. This slide, we're just showing a high level of basically getting the data from your Oracle system to SQL Server. And one of the options that we use here is SSIS. We're going to dive in a little bit more to the different options. So you have a lot of options, and unfortunately there's not really a magic bullet to pick one.
Right.
The enforce supported option is the Lawson utilities. So that's things such as dbdump, range dbdump, exp sysdb. All those are going to be pulling your data out to a flat file using the Lawson metadata definition, which you can copy to a Windows server and load up just fine. The problem that we typically run into is with database size, which I'll talk about a little bit later. There's also third-party software. So we've used things like SQL Server Migration Assistant is a pretty good tool for migrating from Oracle to SQL Server, where it has the plugins and does the conversions for you. Certain situations, we've also used SQL Server tools. So things like SSIS, BCP, link servers, all those you can connect to different database systems to pull data over. Couple of the differences between the database platforms. Reserved words accounts for column name differences. So when you look at certain columns like status or date, that might be a reserved word in SQL Server, but not Oracle. So where that comes into play.
Or vice versa, where in Oracle you'll see a column called r_date, and that same column when hosted on SQL Server is simply date.
Right. So you see that difference between the Lawson metadata and the database. If you look at the Lawson metadata, it's just date, but when it translates that to the database platform, it includes the r_. Also dates, minimum dates. So with SQL Server, it uses the date time, so it has a minimum of 1753 for the year, which Oracle uses 1700. So when you're doing the conversion there, obviously those dates do not want to load in.
Yeah, so those need to be adjusted manually, right?
Yes, through the conversion utilities. And lastly, reports and interfaces. Anything that's touching a direct anything that's doing a database query or a database update directly to the Lawson database tables is going to have to be touched and migrated.
Let's talk about some customizations, like some common customizations that Lawson customers might have in their system, and what's the impact on that style of customization from moving from one platform to another. So first, Carl, tell me about 4GL code. If I'm a Lawson customer and I create a lot of 4GL on my Unix system and I'm looking to go to Windows, what happens to that 4GL code?
So actually, that's probably the easiest one. It mostly stays the same. So the 4GL between the Unix operating system and Windows is the same base code. So a lot of that can just copy over and compile. The only thing we've seen is if you're adding customizations to do system commands from within the COBOL.
Yeah, of course. Now, what about front-end customizations like ESS or RQC customizations?
So those actually remain the same. The code base between those are the same. But typically, if you're migrating platforms, you're looking at doing a update. So just like any update, every time you update ESS or RQC, those customizations have to be remerged.
Okay. Well, that sounds pretty straightforward and pretty much the same as maintaining on Unix. Tell me about scripts, either shell scripts or PL SQL.
Yes, so those are the two toughest ones. When you're looking at Unix shell scripts, those really do not come over at all. For the most part, you're expecting a complete rewrite, whatever that may be. If you're going to continue using like a Perl server-side script or even a Windows batch script, or even just take the chance to rewrite it in IPA. With PL SQL, a significant rewrite as well. You're looking at the syntax differences between PL SQL and T SQL. As well as some functionality is just different.
Right, there's just not a straight one-to-one lineup between those two SQL scripting languages, and sometimes you have to go back to the drawing board again. When you're looking at database objects, custom objects in your database that are not managed by Lawson, do those need to be recreated as well?
Yes, so all those have to be recreated. You're going to be looking at type conversions for the different database mapping types for mapping that over. Also triggers. Triggers are not handled the same at all. So that's basically starting over from scratch and figuring out how it should work in SQL.
Wow.
Extensions, your favorite.
Yeah.
So I think we found for IPA flows in Design Studio, pretty minor development. I think with IPA it depends on how many SQL nodes you're using, or if you're using system command nodes with those wonderful backslashes.
Yeah. If your flows are generally just interacting with Lawson through the application layer, DME calls and AGS calls, there should be pretty minimal impact. I mean, if we look at like a standard requisition approval flow that's doing DME and AGS to interact with requisitions and just setting up an approval matrix through tasks and categories, all that stuff should pretty much be the same once you get over to the other side.
All right. Reports. With some customers, reports can kind of be a big deal.
Yeah.
When you're looking at changing database platforms, the data source itself has to be changed, as well as republished within LBI. So that can kind of be a big deal depending on how many reports you have. Any direct Crystal reports, so users have Crystal reports just running on their PC. All of those ODBC connections, data sources have to be
good
changed.
point. What could be out there? Microsoft Access connections.
Right.
Yeah. If you've allowed your end user community to have direct read-only access to the database, you really need to inventory where those connection points are, who's using those types of tools, and look for a strategy to get those pointed over to a new type of database server.
Right. As well as if your reports are using SQL queries. So typically you have the OLEDB or going through the drag and drop tables, or writing SQL queries. If those are in Oracle, that's written in PL SQL, so it has to be rewritten to T SQL for SQL Server.
Right. So your standard select statements should be fairly ANSI compliant. There won't be a ton of changes there other than any column name differences. But of course, if you're using any special formatting functions or anything that's specific to Oracle functionality, you'll need to find the equivalent in SQL Server and update those SQL statements.
Right. And I guess the general consensus is every report will have to be touched some way or another.
Absolutely.
General integrations. Really anything that's integrating with the Lawson system on the operating system or database level is going to have to be touched. So you're looking at MHC Document Express, bank ACH files.
Right.
Typically, there's a ton of different connections that are all custom to your organization that have to be inventoried, tested, checked out, modified.
All right. So how do we get prepared for a platform migration?
I think there's quite a bit that we can do. Definitely internal resources. So as you mentioned, we're looking at project management. We're looking for developers if you have a lot of customizations. As well as one of the reasons that might be migrating to Windows is looking at Windows administrators, SQL Server DBAs, if we have those internally.
Yeah, assemble your A team because a platform migration project, they're complicated and they do take a lot of input from a lot of different people in your organization. So you want to get everybody working on the same page and set up some regular cadence meetings and a formal communication plan.
And I guess the other thing too is consider the Lawson team skill set. Typically there's a little bit of overcross between operating system administrators and Lawson administrators.
Yeah.
But I think for the most part it's trainable as far as the Windows differences.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, are there any Lawson administrators out there watching today that when you were in elementary school you said, I want to administer Lawson when I grow up, right? We all learn this and we all love learning new things. So this is something we can easily adapt to.
So one of the biggest considerations that we've seen is the database size. So I think typically what we're looking at is not hard and fast formula, but anything under 30 gigabytes, we've been able to pretty consistently use the Lawson database tools. The ones that we looked at, DB dump, range DB dump.
So that is what you consider the Inforce supported methodology for moving from one database system to another. Would be using command line utilities that go through the Lawson application layer, right?
Right.
And that's the easiest method too, right?
Yes, absolutely. Anything over that, we've looked at using a custom solution because most customers don't want to be down for a week to go through an upgrade.
Right.
So we try to fit that in between a 48-hour window. So that's where we started looking at things like the SSIS packages or the SQL Server Migration Assistant for what's the fastest method that we can get data from the old platform to the new platform.
Yeah. If there's one thing we've learned, it's that there's no one-size-fits-all or easy formula for figuring out what the right methodology is. We have a pretty wide tool set to draw from, and we'll start with our best attempt at what we think is going to match well to the customer environment and test it out in our first pass, gather some stats on that, and see what we could do better in future passes. Obviously, when you're looking at moving from one database server to another, there's no easy formula, but the smaller the database, the easier it's going to go for you. You'll have a smoother migration if you have less data that you need to move during a downtime window. So that's why we definitely recommend taking a look at purging old records out of your live database before embarking on such a project. If you've been on Lawson for 10 years or more, especially if you're running all three suites, chances are there are a lot of older records in the system that don't need to be held online. And we've found that generally you can go as far back as 7 years and older. Any records that are older than 7 years are not accessed on a day-to-day basis. So those records can be archived out of the live data area and stored over on the side. So those are records that reduce the amount of size in the transactional database and can still be made available to business users for historical inquiry, and that data can be dealt with, usually outside of a downtime window.
One little side note when we're talking about the size of the database, we found that we really only care about the S3 application data. We don't care about the indexes or Gen or Logan.
Right.
Those don't have to be brought over.
And as far as size on disk, that's probably less than half of the overall storage. Because the indexes, just the indexes on the application product line can be just as large as the actual row data.
Right. So we're looking at rice planning. This is probably one of the biggest things that we've seen for platform migrations. Going through this planning really determines the success of the project from, I think, what we've seen. So going through just making sure that you have a complete list of all your rice components, which is the reports, interfaces, customizations, extensions. Knowing where all those live, who's the business owner, who's going to handle the development for this, really key. And as far as also going through and validating that those are still used.
Right.
Does the business still need those? Are they still relevant? Which is definitely where we've come in and seen with the fit gap assessments and the functional assessments.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we all know that maintaining system customizations is a burden every time there's transformation in the system, be it an upgrade or a move to another platform. So ideally, you want to regularly re-look at the customizations they have in the system and make sure they're really still needed. You know, has there been a change in the functionality of the core application, which now makes a customization obsolete? Or has there been a change in a business process or the way that business users use the system where they no longer require that customization? Or, you know, perhaps there are other organizations out there running Lawson who have faced similar challenges and found novel ways to overcome those challenges without a customization. You know, that's where the fit gap analysis comes in. And it's not just a one-time initiative that you do right before a change. It's an ongoing cycle of re-optimizing your system and making your system easy to maintain and future-proof.
And I don't think anyone wants a project to be bigger than it has to be.
Yeah.
But I think we found that this is a great opportunity for going through those customizations. Go ahead and convert them over to extensions that sit on top of the application. The IPA flows, design studios, or JavaScript functions. It's just a great chance to convert that to something that's compatible with Infor's direction.
Right. If we look at, you know, the different kinds of customizations you can make to Lawson, some customizations are pretty invasive. I mean, you know the ones I'm talking about, the things that need to get reapplied every time you patch the system. Those are difficult to maintain, but there are other types of technologies, particular IPA, Infor Process Automation, that, you know, Infor encourages its customers to make as much use of as possible, and they design the system in such a way that the core application and platform can be upgraded without breaking your IPA flows.
Yep.
So where are you coming from and where are you going is is going to impact you know, some of the things you need to look at in the system. So if we're specifically talking about customers moving to Windows and SQL Server, I think those customers that are currently on you know, AIX platform and Oracle database will find certain similarities between the two systems. And one of those similarities is actually the source code that the Lawson applications are written in, the 4GL code. So, you know, when you've got 4GL code on AIX, that exact same code can be moved over to Windows and recompiled without change. And what that means is if you're building a new LSF server on Windows and you are looking to move your applications over, you don't necessarily need to do a new applications install and then try to port over all the data. You can actually copy the entire product line from your Unix application server into your Windows application server. That means you're going to get the same application version and the same patch set and the same custom 4GL code that you've intermingled with the Infor code. And you just really need to recompile that code. And for the most part, you'll find that it'll run okay on Windows, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you're currently running on iSeries, you know that the Infor Lawson source code is not written in 4GL, it's written in RPG. So we don't have a conversion path from RPG over to 4GL, which means, you know, if you're moving from iSeries, you will be installing a new application product line on your Windows application server, and doing only a database migration. And of course, if there are any customizations you create in RPG, those need to get redeveloped either in 4GL or some other technology. All right, and with that, we'll open it up to any questions you may have.
Yeah, we have a couple questions. We have a couple questions. So the first one is, do you have a sense off the top of your head? You mentioned 68%, but what was the relative size of the organizations? What's maybe the smallest or largest customer you've seen move to Windows SQL?
So in terms of organization size, I think the largest that we saw do a platform migration would be, let's say a healthcare provider with less than 6 hospitals. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. I don't want to give away any names here who haven't necessarily allowed me to use their names in this presentation. But a fairly mid-sized customer, I think, for the Lawson space. We've seen and helped customers move to Windows that might have ESS deployed and they have 5,000 users.
Yeah,
That's
I think that 100 to 150 gig of data, 5,000 users, what we've seen.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. We can get some information back to them. Next is, we're currently on Lawson 10, Unix, Oracle, and are looking to implement Global HR as our next major project. Mm-hmm. Is Windows SQL also the preferred platform for Global HR?
Oh, that's a great question. You probably already know that the Landmark application server can either run on AIX or on Windows. And on AIX, you can use the Oracle database. On Windows, you can use either Oracle or SQL Server databases. I wouldn't. Personally, I don't think I would say there's one particular platform that is the preferred platform for Global HR. I'll go ahead and say that as my opinion. Is certainly I'm not the authority on that, so happy to entertain other opinions on the subject. We've seen if you are. If you have a commitment to the AIX platform, the Oracle platform in your organization, you have many other applications on that platform, you intend to continue to have the skill set, the resource set to support that platform going forward, then by all means keep both your LSF and Landmark servers on AIX and Oracle. We have experience installing it and supporting it on that platform, and there are no major downsides to that. There's no lack of functionality when you're running Landmark on that platform. But I will say that most of our customers run Landmark on Windows. Even those customers that run LSF on AIX, a lot of them have decided to run Landmark on Windows. If I could phone a friend right now, I'd phone Jeremy Stoltzfus, who you guys can see tomorrow in a presentation on IPA, and please ask him the same question, and he can tell you about the infrastructure in place at Penn State Hershey Medical Center, which is a fairly large customer live with Global HR.
All right, great. We had a couple other questions.